look at the Christmas story and the way it's been presented to us, you see such a beautiful manger scene, no? Minsan, glitters of gold. The hay in the manger is so fixed. Parang there's no hay that is out of place. When you look at the manger scene, it's most often than not, it seemed so clean and so nice and so beautifully presented. And if you outrightly recall what a barn would smell like, not that all of us have been able to see a barn, but it's not at all this beautiful or this clean, right? Especially when you see Mary holding on to the baby and then nakangiti siya and then some of the pictures would have Jesus smiling back. Mind you, I'm sure it wasn't like that at all. The song Silent Night also doesn't depict of the silence of the evening. The angels were singing, "Glory to God in the highest." Paano naging silent? Diba? I'm sure the baby would have been crying because Mary did not know how to handle her kid yet. Because first baby. So the beautiful scene, I don't think, was a beautiful scene at all. The place was messy, the place dingy, it was dark. And I am sure Mary was struggling on how to handle the baby Jesus. And as with any stories, teleserye or meron tayong dapat kainisan, diba? There's someone who's nakakainis in the story, and the same was with the story of Jesus. At his birth, it was already challenging. Remember, Mary and Joseph were supposed to be wed, but they weren't wed yet when the news of the baby coming happened. That wasn't a pleasant thing to welcome. And the event of that day, of those days, were not also pleasant. Even before Ebenezer Scrooge or the Grinch happened, there was an original Grinch of Christmas. So I have entitled our conversation today, "The Original Grinch of Christmas," which we will be brought to the story of King Herod the Great. If you are going to be asked, what part of the Christmas story could you identify with? Would you be able to identify with Mary, that meek young woman who was just submissive to God's call? Would you be Joseph, who would be counting all cost and obeying the God who revealed to him that he was going to be a part of the story of the Redeemer? I hope we won't be able to identify with the Grinch of Christmas. But truth be told, one way or the other, there is going to be a revelation that there is always a little King Herod in our lives. So, I hope it's not true, but as we go through the story today, I am sure that, medyo ako yun ah. You'll be able to identify with him one way or the other. And if there's one thing that King Herod realized, and we will all be able to realize, it is this: that there's no stopping God's master plan. What's a master plan? A master plan is a point of action that needs to be completed. It is a plan that is drawn up at the beginning before you even do it, and it has to be realized to the end. And we will know and understand from this story that there is no stopping to God's master plan. It cannot be stopped, it cannot be thwarted, it cannot be prevented. God's plan will happen no matter what. And King Herod had to face that challenge, that he was going to go against it. But realize that even he, facing the no matter what situation, he also could not stop it. As what Isaiah said, "The Lord Almighty has sworn, surely as I have planned, so it will be. And as I have purposed, so it will happen. This was when the Israelites were having such a big problem, and they didn't know where to go and what to do. And Isaiah said, no matter what happens, what God has planned, it will be. And what He has purposed, it will happen. We heard of this in the series of Pastor Butch on Isaiah, and we really saw it, that the plan of God will happen. There is no stopping to that. And Job also attested to this fact. I know you can do anything, and no one can stop you. Nothing, absolutely nothing can stop the master plan of God into happening. And what is the master plan of God? From Genesis to Revelation, it is written. It is the ultimate salvation plan of God. That we are not an afterthought, even way past the beginning, even before the creation of the world, even before Adam and Eve fell. He already knew He was going to redeem the world, and there was a plan. It was going to be through His Son Jesus that He was going to do that. There is no stopping whatsoever in God's master plan from happening. It will happen. It will happen that we will be redeemed with Him. We will have that part in the new creation story of Jesus, that the one who called us will be there to welcome us home. So if you're ready, this is going to be exciting, and you will wonder, why is that part of the Bible? If you don't read your Bible, you will miss out on exciting stories like this. Stories that might have been, ba't kasama yan? Totoo ba yan? Did it happen? There are stories like that. Exciting. So go to your Bibles and read it. So let's read Matthew chapter 2, starting with verse 1. After Jesus was born, how long after? It was not stipulated, but they can more or less compute. He was about 6 months to about 2 years old when this after happened. So Jesus was no longer a baby. So if you will remember the manger scene, there were 3 kings there, diba? There were 3 figures additional to that. Those people, we will go through that story in a little while, were not there in the birth of Jesus. Because this story was not right after He was born. It was already months after He was born. So after Jesus was born, the time is now being set. Where was He born? In Bethlehem and in Judea. Bethlehem was a small, obscure town. Kaya nga, di ba, the song goes, "O little town of Bethlehem." There was nothing that was like interesting about the place, except that it is already known as prophesied that it was David's city, and it was the place where the ruler of Israel was going to come from. So the people were already expectant that there was going to be something in the story of Bethlehem that will bring them to a big story, to an even bigger story. Okay? Bethlehem was the place where Ruth settled. Remember our Ruth series? Thus making her part of the genealogy of Jesus as written in Matthew. So if you will read that story, if you will read the genealogy which is written in Matthew chapter 1, you will be able to see that, yes, Ruth is there, David is there, because the plan to be able to have the ruler of Israel coming from the line of David needed to happen. That's why God was already fixing everything, putting things in order so that the redemptive plan of God will happen. So, after Jesus was born, we were already set on the time. We were already set also on the venue, which is in Bethlehem in Judea, as prophesied in Micah. But you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah, it was called Ephrathah before, and it was the bread basket of Israel. So you know that it is such of a fertile land that produce were in abundance. He said, are only a small village among all the people of Judah, yet a ruler of Israel whose origins are from the distant past, not even in Abraham's past, way before that. We heard that in our conversation last week, that way before the beginning, the ruler of Israel was already there, whose origins are in the distant past, will come from you. You may be a quiet little town now, unknown, but soon you will have a part in the redemptive plan of God. So after Jesus was born in Bethlehem, it was during the time of King Herod. So King Herod was the ruler during that time. So history will say that indeed it happened during that time. There is a King Herod, there is a Bethlehem, it was the breadbasket, and the ruler of Israel was going to come from there. So park that in your mind as we go through who King Herod was. Referred to as Herod the Great. He was a non-Jew. As a matter of fact, he was an Edomite. But he was referred to as the King of the Jews. Not a title the Jews gave him. It was a title that the Romans gave him. Why? Because he was a very good politician. He was able to prosper politically, economically, and peace abound in the land during the time of his reign. If there is one person who is an ultimate balimbing, it is King Herod. Because he knew who to side with. Initially, his friend Mark Antony, yes, Mark Antony of Cleopatra, if you remember that story. Mark Antony was his friend. And when Mark Antony got out of the picture of the Roman rule, he sided with the opposition. Diba? Shrewd politician. He knew who to be able to be with so that he will continue to be in power. A visionary leader. He built massive. He had a master plan on the building of Judea. He was an astute builder. Massive buildings, bridges, aqueducts during the time that aqueducts weren't a known thing yet. He was a great engineer that part of the buildings that he built was the Temple of Jerusalem. Why? To be able to appease the Jews. He was a non-Jew and he was not a practicing Jew. That to be able to go into as close as possible to the Jewish culture and to be identified with the people, he needed to marry someone among the Jewish royalty. And to be able to do that, in his shrewdness, he banished his first wife and her son so that they were going to be out of the picture so that he can readily marry Mariamne, who is from the royalty of the Jews. But that was only as close as he could get because he was not born a Jew. And because of that, the King of the Jews title among the Jews were a no-no. He was not an accepted leader to them because he was not a Jew. But one thing that overshadowed how good he was also very generous. He would give to the people just to be able to gain their favor. In spite of being such a good builder, in spite of all the developments that he was able to create, to do and build, there was one thing that overshadowed who he was. He was known to be insanely suspicious. So suspicious that someone was always after his throne. To the point that he would do anything just to be able to cling to that throne. Anything, absolutely anything. He was so insanely suspicious that he had to have his wife, he had to have a wife, the mother-in-law by that wife, and 3 of his sons killed, murdered. Why? Because he thought they were after his throne. He wanted to hold on tight to his throne no matter what. That he was going to kill anybody who was in the way. Can you imagine being suspicious all the time? Everyone you'd see, that man is after my throne. His friends, supposedly, associates, but he also killed the Sanhedrin because he thought they were after him and wanted to oust him. That was how insanely suspicious King Herod was. That the Romans had this to say about him: it is better to be Herod's sow than one of his sons. He was savage, he was cruel, he was ruthless to the point of being barbaric. The season that Jesus was born was not pleasant at all. It was so scary and fearful. The Grinch of Christmas, in the person of King Herod the Great, wanted to stop Christmas from happening. He wanted to end it right there, as the story will reveal. So after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, so that was the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came from Jerusalem. What are Magi? Magi's are wise men. They are not kings, but they are king makers. They were the mentors, advisors. They were so wise that kings would seek after them. You remember Daniel's story? When Nebuchadnezzar wanted his dreams interpreted, who were the people that he called first? The wise men. Those are the Magi. They knew for some reason how the stars were aligned, how the moon was aligned. They would be observing that and telling and advising the kings then of how to be able to run their kingdom. And these were the Magi who came to Jerusalem. It is believed that these Magi came from Persia. Legend after legend has happened to them, that their story has now evolved to something so much more and so much bigger, that now the manger story, the manger scene, has become even more colorful, with 3 Magi, with 3 kings from the east who were there. How did they know they were kings from the east? Pag nakita niyo yung picture, di ba, they're differently colored. That's the measure that they were from the east. And coming from the east to Jerusalem was not an easy travel path. It was long and tedious. And mind you, there were not only 3. The only reason that 3 was identified to them was because of the presents that they gave, which we will read later on. But to travel during that time, you cannot travel with just the 3 of you. There will be bandits, there will be coyotes. At the very least, it was a caravan. If they were wise men, they would have bodyguards to protect them. So yun pa lang, that's already a whole caboodle of people. There's a lot of bodyguards who would be protecting them, seeing to it that they are kept safe. So it is not true that there's only 3, mga kapatid. They are even more who visited. It was a whole caravan, and they said it was about 200 to 300 people because they needed protection. And people being nomadic at that time, they would be a whole community at the very least. Them, their wives, their children, and their household would be moving. So hindi lang po sila 3. There were a lot who visited and moved from the east to come to Jerusalem. And what did they do? Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? During that time, walang text message. There's no phone call. If you wanted something, if you wanted to ask something, you needed to go to the town square at the very least to announce, "Excuse me, where is the one born King of the Jews? Hello, excuse me, where is the one?" It was repeatedly being announced. Or people who would be coming back and forth into the town square, they would, "Excuse me, do you know where the person born King of the Jews is? Do you know where?" They would constantly ask and ask and ask until they would know the answer to their question. "We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." The direction of the stars, the direction of the sun, the direction of the moon, and what it reveals during that time spoke a lot of how they were going to conduct themselves. The sundial, remember? They could tell time because of where the sun was, where the moon was casting a shadow, where the stars is now, what stars are in the sky. They'd know the season. Okay, uulan na. Para tayo din, di ba? When we see the clouds darkening, ay, siguro uulan. We'd know that. We'd know that there could be rain because the clouds were getting dark. And we know that clouds collect rainwater, so when it gets heavy, it becomes thick and becomes dark. And that was pretty much what was happening during that time. The stars, they know, during winter, these are the stars that are out. During summer, these are the stars that are out. Venus and Saturn would align themselves. They'd know that. And syempre, dahil walang TV, stargazing was one of the major things that they would be doing. So, they say, when we saw the star when it rose and have come to worship Him. The reason why they were coming was they wanted to accord worship to a king. Because you only worship a king. But who was the king during that time? It was King Herod the Great. So there was no one who you could accord worship to except him. So imagine what he was feeling, what his emotions was during the time that he heard this. So when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed. And you know that the right translation for disturbed here is he was shaking violently. Ganun siya ka-disturbed that he was shaking. And it was not only him. All of Jerusalem with him. Why? Because they knew how the king would react every time he's upset. Sino kaya ipapapatay nito? Diba? Because that was his move always. Every time there is something that is going to happen or something that's going to go wrong, that was his point of action. He would just simply act on it harshly and without even thinking of whatever consequences it might have. So the king was so disturbed that he called for all the chief priests and the teachers of the law. So he was covering all grounds. The religious part from the priests and the legal part from the teachers. He called in all his wise advisors and asked them, where was the Messiah born? Because during that time he was already born. He acknowledged that it was the Messiah who was being asked about. He knew. But he did not know so much because he was not a Jew. So, the chief priests and the teachers of the law declared to him in Bethlehem, in Judea. Because as I've said, it is already prophesied in the book of Micah. They already knew. They were already expectant that the Messiah, the ruler of Israel, was going to come from Bethlehem. And Matthew reiterates the verse from Micah when he says, he is going to be born in Bethlehem, the land of Judah. So Herod's mind would have been running in Bethlehem. That's just very near. The ruler who's going to be the shepherd is going to be born in Bethlehem. That's part of his rule. So he could very well do something. Then Herod called on the Magi because he already heard that they were asking around. So he called for the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Because then he would be able to know about how old the Messiah, the king, the one born to be king of the Jews, was born. So he would be able to understand how long more before this king of the Jews would come to rule over me. How long an action point can I have? He needed to know the exact time the star had appeared to be able to put a timeline as to how soon he needed to act. So, he sent them and allowed them to go to Bethlehem. Yes, go ahead. Search for the child carefully. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go to worship him. Do you really think he was up to worship the Messiah? Do you think he was really wanting to go and see him and give worship to him? Well, we will find out. Because after they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star, by this time, so nag-appear yung star, they saw it, by this time, the star daw wasn't there. But when the time that they left, that was the season that the star appeared again. And the star guided them over to the place, and lo and behold, the story says that when they were there, the star stopped right where the place of the child was. Take note, it's not a baby anymore. It's already a child. When they saw the star, they were simply overjoyed because they knew that they were being guided to the place where the Messiah was born, which was what they wanted to seek. And on coming to the house, they saw the child and his mother Mary, and what did they do? They bowed down to him and worshipped him. And then they opened treasures and presented him the gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, presents worthy of a king. Recognizing, these wise men recognized that he was a king. And mind you, these wise men were not even believers, but they acted on the news, went to bow down in worship. They did not only bow down, but they presented him with gifts worthy of adoration, worthy of worshiping a real king. They knew and they believed the revelation that has reached them, the prophecy that has reached them, that the ruler, the king of the Jews, was going to be born in Bethlehem, and a star directed them there, pretty much as the shepherds were directed to where the baby Jesus was born. And having been warned in a dream, they were told not to go back to Herod, because remember, Herod told them, come back to me and tell me where it's going to be so I too can worship him. But they knew, in a dream also it was confirmed, do not return there, do not go back, because he's going to have a plan for you. So instead of that, they went through another route, passing another path so that they would not pass through King Herod, pass through Jerusalem, so that they will not need to pay respect to King Herod. Then what happened? When they had gone, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. True to form, as who King Herod has presented himself to be. Cruel, savage, barbaric. He was out to stop Christmas. He was going to kill Christmas. He was willing to kill a child who was professed to be the Messiah, who was professed to be King of the Jews. Because he was not a Jew. He was not born there, and he could not go back to his mother's womb or change his mom to be able to be a Jew. He knew that when this one, born King of the Jews, will come, they will definitely go and pay homage to him and respect him as king. Even 40 years down the road of King Herod's rule, even after all of the beautiful buildings, the development of of his kingdom was, no matter how peaceful the land was during his rule, only the Romans could acknowledge that, not the Jews. He was never acknowledged as King of the Jews. Can you imagine how Mary felt? That someone is out to kill my child? And she was going to carry that on, the worry, the concern, that the baby or a child, a little child, was going to be killed. But mind you, we all know that there's no stopping in God's master plan. And what is that? That the King of the Jews, born in Bethlehem, was going to rule and shepherd his people and lead them. That's why in the mind of the Jews, they knew that someone was going to rally for them and rule over them. And when you say rule, he had to be tough. He had to go against King Herod if he was going to rule, right? That was in the mind of the Jews. They never thought that it was going to be someone so meek and mild like Jesus. That's why a lot of them couldn't believe that this is the Messiah. They wanted someone else. They wanted someone who was like David, who would conquer and win battles, who would go to war. That was their concept of the ruler who was going to rule over them. So Joseph obeyed. He got up, took the child and the mom, and during the night they left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. Why? Because it needed to be fulfilled. That the Lord had said through the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. God's plan had to happen. So he needed to bring Jesus and Mary and Joseph to Egypt for the master plan of God to come into fruition. It is going to happen, but not before the Grinch will move. When Herod realized that he has been outwitted by the Magi, I can imagine Herod waiting at his throne. Dumating na ba? Are the Magi's there? Can you look out? Are the Magi's there? Have they returned? No. So it's been months and months and months. And it was then that he realized, they're not coming back. They're not coming back. So what did he do? He was so furious that he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity. Not only Bethlehem, but even the close-by towns that he was ruling over. He wanted all the baby boys and the toddlers to be killed. I can imagine his guards, his bodyguards and his people when he was telling them, kill all the 2-year-old and below boys in Bethlehem and our near vicinity. That is an order. Maybe some of the guards had 2-year-old boys or younger. He did not know how old exactly the baby was, the boy was. So he needed to, mga lampas, lagyan niya ng consideration that, okay, until 2 years old, kill them all. But during that time, they said it was about 20 to 30 babies. But that did not negate the gravity, how barbaric this move was, how cruel and how savage. It is still so savage to even think of killing helpless children. And do you know that this scene has been painted over and over again? The massacre of the innocents. In accordance to the timeline that he has learned from the Magi, he was able to calculate. And all baby boys, 2-year-old and below, were massacred, were killed. If you're able to see the painting personally, you'll just have really goosebumps on how the painters were able to capture the scene. Mothers running away with their children, and the children were killed, and anyone, even the mothers and fathers who would get in the way. That's why it was really such a great bloodshed. And you say, Tita Barry, ba't naman sinama yan sa Christmas story? Diba now you see The manger scene, the birth of Jesus, is not all that clean and glittery and beautiful. There's a backstory to it that is sordid and scary, and there's murder and killing. Because King Herod was sick during that time. He was very sick. As a matter of fact, they said that maybe that was one of the reasons why that was driving him mad, was because he was very sick. He was in so much pain that he knew he was going to die. As a matter of fact, he tried to kill himself just to get away from the agony of it. But he was saved. And he needed to wait until the time that he was really going to die. And do you know why? To ensure that that there were people who was going to cry when he died, he had all of the rich and famous heads of the family jailed. And the instruction to the guards was to kill them when he died. Why? So that people will cry. Even not for him. People will think, they're crying because their king died. That was how horrific his planning was. That was how bad this king was. And after Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and the mother and go to the land of Israel. Go back home. For those who were trying to take the child's life is dead." Of course, when King Herod died, they just let go of all the rich and famous. They did not kill them. So wala naman na siya. There's nobody to check if that happened or not. But indeed, that was how King Herod's mind was going. That was how sordid this man's brain was. So he got up, took the child and the mother. Why? He needed to fulfill that the Messiah was going to be called a Nazarene. The kingdom at that time was divided into 3. And Joseph chose to go to the land which he thought the Herod who was leading there was kind of good and that they were going to be safe. So he moved to Nazareth so that the fulfillment of what the prophet said, that the baby born to be ruler of Israel, the king of the Jews, was going to be a Nazarene. Can you see how God was fixing everything so that his master plan was going into fulfillment? In God's providence, remember our series on Ruth? In God's providence, there is no coincidence. Everything is happened as planned. And there's no stopping to that. Hallelujah, there's no stopping to God's plan. It will happen. So in spite of this very sad, murderous story, you can still look forward with hope because God's plan will happen. And you and I are part of that plan. Amen? We are part of that plan. The plan of God has been laid out since way past the beginning. He was going to redeem the world. He is going to redeem mankind. Salvation is out for the offering. It needed to happen this way. Why did King Herod's story needed to be part of the birth of Jesus? To be able to show us that there is no stopping. No matter how crude or rude or savage a ruler is, no matter what they want to do, they can never kill Christmas. Because that is God's plan for mankind. It is going to happen. No matter what you're going through now. You weren't able to go home. Christmas is for family. I'm sure the internet in the Philippines was just soaring high in use the other night, because of Zoom parties with our families in the Philippines, right? FB Messenger was on. You were cooking, they're already talking to you, showing you what they're preparing. Ito kainggit na inggit. They're also happy, celebrating, and that's how we can celebrate. But did that kill Christmas? No. We celebrated with excitement. Right? You lost your job. We lost family members this year. Did that stop Christmas? No. Why? Because there's no stopping to God's master plan. Hold that hope in your heart. It will happen. Jesus Christ will come again. The birth of Jesus is the story of God's redemption plan fulfilled. And there is going to be an end to this when Jesus comes to redeem his people to himself. Who are you in the Christmas story? Are you Mary and Joseph, who, regardless of all things, just obeyed with faith? It was not a blind obedience. It was in faith that they knew that they were going to be part of the Christmas story. Are you the shepherds who, when announced that your Messiah has come, run and follow the star to be able to see the baby born in a manger? But truth be told, there's a King Herod in our hearts. One way or the other, we prevent Christmas from happening year in and year out. How? We keep our faith to ourselves. We hide it. Remember last week when we said that Jesus came not only as light of the world, but to give us life. And there is a story to that life. You can share it and proclaim it. Are you the Magi who, coming from far, far, far away, still obeyed and went to worship a king whom they did not know? But nonetheless, they went because they knew that he indeed is king. What is your reaction to the Christmas story? Are you continually keeping quiet? Keeping the birth of Jesus in your hearts alone? Or are you shining like the torches that we did last week to be able to share and proclaim to one and all that, hey, Jesus, the Messiah, the ruler of the Jews, has been born. And he has a room for you being prepared in heaven. What are we doing? What is our reaction to the Christmas story? Are we worshiping and bringing gifts, bringing our gifts, sharing our gifts, our talents that God himself has given us? Or are we just staying in our homes and keeping quiet, keeping to ourselves? Nakakahiya po. I don't have that gift. I cannot proclaim. I will call Pastor Butch or Pastor Martin or Brother Mar or my koinonia leader. Sila lang po mag-share. What is your response to the Christmas story? The Magi came and worshipped and gave of their gifts. Last week, the call was to share and serve. This week, I want us to be a little bit more selfish. Consider Christ. Consider him to be ruler of your life. If you have been a Christian, a believer for so long, consider Christ. Renew a fresh relationship with him. And take hold of the promise that he has given, that I will rule your life, the whole of you. Not just a portion, not just a little part of it. Only those that I cannot manage, Lord, the rest I can. I'll do it myself. No. He wants lordship of everything. I hope that as the year ends and a new year comes, consider him to continue to rule in your life, in every aspect of your life, and express that rulership that Christ has in your life. Consider Christ. This pandemic has been running on for 2 years. And it has held us back so much. but it has also propelled us to even higher things. We have been able to reach out to more people because the internet has been alive and really just breaking, that we were able to touch base with a lot of people. As the year ends, don't lose hope, but instead look up to that hope who came, the light of the world, who gives life to mankind, has been born. And when you consider Christ, allow Him to rule in your life, because that hope who has come wants to rule your life starting today. Be part of the Christmas story and share the Christmas story to others. Merry Christmas and God bless you.